Going straight here back into the video. Today's video is what if Heather and Scott swap seasons. So let's begin. So to begin, Scott will be put onto the Screaming Gophers, and Katie and Izzy would still swap teams. Scott would jump because he wouldn't encounter Fang because Fang couldn't beat. Scott would jump because Scott originally didn't jump because he met a mutant shark which was named Fang. Is not there. I think Scott would jump. So the only person is Beth. And I think the Gophers would still win the challenge because I can't see Scott really doing anything in this episode. And I don't think it'd be completely out of Rangers Island, but Scott would want to complete the challenges all the time. Because first of all, there's a smaller cast, and Scott wants to get rid of competition so that this would still work. But I imagine he would do this to a lesser extent and would have come up with other strategies as well. And Ezekiel's still here to say his comment. Episode 3, The Big Sleep Challenge. Scott would make an alliance with, try to work on Beth and Lindsay, but realises Justin's now working on them. Scott would try to work on Owen because Scott would see that Owen's very easy to manipulate. I think Eva and Duncan get to the end. Now, Heather's not here to steal Eva's free player, so that's important. I think what would happen is Scott's a farm boy. So even if Scott wins the challenge, I think the Gophers already win this challenge. And Katie and Sadie, and I think they vote for Katie. Sadie and Bridget. So Jeff will vote for Bridget. So Duncan's little group vote for Katie. Katie and Sadie vote for Tyler, for Eva. Courtney votes for Harold. And Bridget also votes Harold, so I think Katie's out here because Eva wouldn't get sabotaged. Katie wouldn't get sabotaged, so he doesn't lose his MP3 player. Episode 4 is Dodgeball. Scott would do terrible in the challenge, and Noah still refuses / doesn't compete. Eva, Duncan, and now Harold win the challenge, and everyone still gangs up on Noah. Episode 5 is The Talent Show, and it will be Justin, Trent, and Owen. And I think it's going to be DJ, Courtney, and Bridget. Bridget pukes on everyone. Harold still beatboxes winning the challenge. And Scott will probably try sabotaging his own team. So, Justin wants to vote for Trent. He can get Cody, Beth, Lindsay, and Owen. But Scott, being Scott, would be in talk people. And he wants to get Justin out because Scott knows Justin's a threat, right? He knows he's going to be a threat in the merge. He's not going to be a threat to the ladies. And he talks to Trent, Gwen, and Lashana on how Justin is going to be a huge problem. And Scott would talk to Owen. As Scott says to Owen, you know, you're my true friend, pal. Here, if you vote with me, I'll get you some sticky muffins. Like, Owen can easily be convinced. Like, Heather was able to convince him in the original, so I think Scott can do the same thing. And Scott needs one more vote to make sure Trent doesn't be in a tiebreaker, because there's a chance Trent could lose the tie and then he's sent home. I think Scott convinces Izzy. And I think Scott would say, you know, Scott would convince Izzy that Justin's too much of a threat. And I think Scott would say, well, you want to keep Gwen happy. I feel like Justin still goes. Episode 6 is The Sucky Outdoors. Owen tells the bear story. I think... Can you see you don't get lost? So that's important for the killer bass. And Izzy chases him up a tree. Sending the Gophers. to elimination. Now, Scott would want to get Izzy out because she cost him the challenge. And he talks to Lindsay and Beth on how they should make an alliance to get to the final three. And the people he convinces to get rid of Izzy are Gwen, Trent, as Trent thanks Scott for saving him last challenge, and he gets Cody. So I think Izzy gets eliminated. However, because Izzy's eliminated here, she now is chased down with CRMP, so she's just removed after this challenge. She's actually voted off this time. Episode 7's phobia factor. So let's go for the fears. Owen gets a point. Lindsay and Beth get a point. Gwen gets a point, and Trent, Cody fails the time bomb. Sean fails, and we get back to Scott. Harold fails. He passes, Courtney fails, Bridget fails, Duncan passes, Eva's Warrens passes, Jeff passes, Tyler was threatened by Eva, so he would pass. Sadie passes. He passes. Scott would throw. I feel like by his fear wall, I feel like Scott would fail on purpose, so he fails. So they have 5 points. To the Killbasses, 5 points. But now they have to face a tiebreaker. And because there's 4 people that fail on the Killbass to their 4 people, I think they now lose. And I think they just gang up on Courtney because Tyler does his fear in this universe. And I think Courtney can't save herself here. Episode 8 is Up the Creek. Scott will get Beth and Lindsay to separate Gwen and Trent. So Lindsay goes to Gwen. He goes to Cody and says we should get Cody to go for Gwen. Owen and Beth. She's Scott and Owen. Bridget and Eva. Bridget takes Sadie. Jeff and DJ. Tyler and Harold, which leaves Duncan and Eva. Eva and Tyler, which leaves Duncan and Harold. Now, Harold still accidentally burns the ores, but I don't think Scott would make himself a target to give him an idea to push back their team, because Scott could easily make himself a target here. So I think because Harold burned the ores, I think the Killer Bass lose the challenge, and they vote for Harold. Episode 9 is People Deer Hunter. It's Trent, Gwen, Cody, and Scott. For the Killer Bass, we have Sadie, Duncan, Eva, and Tyler. DJ. Tyler's a hunter. DJ by himself almost won the challenge, so I do think DJ would win. Scott would be okay, but Cody wouldn't get mauled by a bear here, as Heather's not here to ask for the barbecue chips, and Scott would actually be trying in the challenge, unlike Heather. Scott realizes that Cody and Trent have made up, and he goes to Owen and wants to get out Lashana. Because Lashana is a big threat and a person he's threatened by. So Scott wants to get her out, but Scott realizes Cody and Owen are friends. So Scott goes to Cody and talks about how they need to vote Lashana, and says that he can get Gwen to it himself. On top of the fact that Lashana, once him, Lindsay, and Owen are gone, Cody is next, which is enough to convince Cody. Trent would also be on board as he's grateful that Scott saved him last challenge, so I think Lashana's out. Episode 10, I feel like Trent and Scott would be friends. And the cooking challenge, Beth would still take this tiki statue at this point, which is something that Scott would keep note of. And I think because Beth trusts Scott enough, she talks to Scott on how she got the tiki statue, which Scott takes for later, so he can use it for himself. Scott says he'll dispose of this statue and promises that he'll help Gwen out. Help Beth. Jeff is taking Captain still, and Scott volunteers Lindsay with Owen still eating the ribs, sending the go for elimination. Now, Scott wouldn't want to reveal Beth's idol yet, so he has no problem getting everyone to vote for Owen, so I think Owen is out. Episode 11 is the Who You Can Trust challenge, so it's Gwen and Scott, Duncan DJ, and Gwen Scott, Trent Lindsay, Jeff Bridget, Trent gets infirmary, Cody Beth, Sadie Eva, Tyler Duncan, Lindsay Cody gets infirmary, and then DJ Jeff against Scott and Gwen. DJ still loses the challenge, and I think they used to vote for Sadie because she's at least helpful in challenges. Duncan would have his 5-person group alliance, and Jeff would want to keep Bridget in the game, so I think Eva is in that group of Tyler in the universe, so they vote off Sadie. Episode 12 is basics training, and I think Scott throws. Tyler wins the challenge for his team, and Scott knows he has to face a tiebreak between Lindsay, Gwen, and Trent. But Scott still has the cursed statue. So Scott plays a bit dirty here, and it just has to be done. And basically he gets Gwen sabotaged. And because of that, these three are forced would decide to vote Cody in a tiebreaker. But Scott doesn't want the chance to tie, so Scott knows that Trent won't vote for Gwen, and Cody won't vote for Gwen. So he sabotages Gwen with the cursed statue. The guys are shocked about Gwen, and they're forced to vote her off. Trent wouldn't vote for Gwen, but I think Cody would probably hesitantly vote for Gwen. It doesn't really matter because I think Gwen's out here. Episode 13, Extreme Torture. Scott would be comforting Cody and Trent on how he's so sorry that Gwen's out, and he wished he could have something he could have done. Trent and Cody don't blame him, and Beth is annoyed at Scott, but Scott goes to Beth and says, "Hey, look, I know that wasn't a statue, that wasn't your cursed statue, it's not what it looked like, it was a replica, but it's Beth not buying it." And Scott's kind of scheming throughout the day, going to Trent and Cody and talking about how we need to get Beth out. And we see a confessional of Scott saying he needs to get Beth out as fast as possible. We see a confessional of Beth being suspicious of Scott as she's now fully rebelled and kind of questioning his alliance. In episode 13 is Trent DJ. I think Trent still falls on the plane like he does. Scott and Eva. Scott and Jeff, Scott, Lindsay, and then Eva. Now I have this top coming off. There's no reason for the killer bass to wipe out, so I think they win the challenge. Now Scott will tell everyone that Beth sabotaged Gwen, and because of that, they vote her off. So now it's guys versus girls. Now I don't know how this would work because there are a lot more guys. But I think the girls win. But it doesn't really matter because it's not an elimination round. And now it's merch. And we are bringing back Izzy as well. And I'm bringing back Ezekiel because I think Scott and Zeke are farm boys, so they get on really well. Episode 15, Cody would have... Scott would have his little group of... and tells to the group they should make you form a Go for the Alliance. Scott would be happy that Izzy could also be added, and he would talk to Ezekiel on how they should work together. Lindsay would want to add Tyler as well, which Scott being also really cool with, but needs to get rid of Duncan. I think between Eva and Tyler, I think Eva would win the challenge, as Scott wouldn't do that well here. Duncan, Jeff, DJ, and Bridget would vote for Scott because they get a scary vibe from him. So the Eva, Bridget, Duncan, DJ, and Jeff would vote for Ezekiel. Scott's able to convince Izzy to vote off instead of Eva to vote off Jeff. And I think Tyler. I think if it just gangs up on Ezekiel. Which really sucks because I don't think Scott can really save him here. Is there a way for him to be saved? No, I think Ezekiel just gets eliminated, which really sucks, but I just don't see how Ezekiel can be saved. Episode 16, Scott wins immunity. And Duncan still has his little alliance. And I think Tyler's not going to vote for Lindsay. And I think they're just going to vote off Izzy because she's the biggest threat that's not immune. She's a returning player. So I think Duncan's friend group and Bridget just vote off Izzy. Episode 17, Time to Be Sneaky. I think Scott would win the challenge. And I'm also going to say Duncan wins because I think Duncan has to pass by him outside of. So Eva wins immunity. And Duncan sees there are two couples. So he sees there are two couples. Lindsay and Tyler, Jeff and Bridget. And Duncan and Scott, they talk to each other, right? So Duncan and Scott make a temporary truce because Duncan knows that if he gets rid of Scott's group, eventually, once these guys are all on, and it's down to the final 6, 7, it's going to be too late and the couples are going to outrank them. But now that Duncan has majority, DJ and Eva don't like this idea, but Duncan tells them to go along with it. This also saves Ezekiel, and Scott wants to keep Ezekiel on side, because Scott would say that he's going to be the easiest to bring to the finale, as he knows him personally. Scott says to Duncan that they should vote for Bridget, which of course Duncan accepts. And DJ and Eva are a bit more hesitant because they are friends of Bridget, but with some convincing of Duncan, I think they do vote Bridget off. Which is kind of ironic considering the fact Duncan does this like 2 episodes later, so Bridget's out. Jeff would be devastated that Bridget's out, but he would just think Scott would have done it, and somebody must have flipped in the alliance. As they don't know what happened. So episode 16, Extreme Torture. I think Scott would win immunity. And I think everyone else gets their keys. I think Scott would realise that he wants to keep Eva around Tyler, but he realises Lindsay and Tyler are the last couple. So Duncan and Scott are still working together. And Scott says, why don't we just vote Lindsay? As Tyler's a bigger threat. And Scott says, well, I'll just vote for Lindsay instead. So these 5 vote for Lindsay. And Scott realizes he has to face the tiebreaker. But Scott says, why don't he wants to get rid of Tyler, and Duncan wants to get rid of Lindsay. Which Scott is okay with. So I think Duncan's little group and Scott once again vote off Lindsay. Episode 17, Tyler and Jeff are now fully loyal to Duncan. And Scott realizes now they have a 5v5. Scott would win the hide and be sneak challenge, and DJ and Tyler are fighting on the roof. So I think Ezekiel and Eva. Ezekiel and Eva win immunity. So I think Duncan is going to get these 5 to vote for Izzy. And Scott does either 5 to vote for Tyler, but he's going to vote off Izzy instead because she's a bigger threat than Tyler. So episode 18 is the bike race, and I think Cody wipes out and DJ. Jeff gets the bolts. Tyler wipes out. Ezekiel wipes out, and they're most both for the second round. So Duncan and Scott wipe out, and between Eva and Trent, I think Trent gets eliminated because Eva's way stronger than Trent, and I imagine she would be a machine on a bike. So I think due to the unfair ruling, it's an automatic elimination for Trent, regardless of who actually wins the challenge. So episode 19 is Sucker Screamer, and it's still DJ. Ezekiel would win the challenge because he was really good in the Jack the Ripper one, with facing the real Psycho Killer with Duncan facing the Chef. Eva would also do very well, and that's really that. So episode 20 is Wakanda Gone Wild. Scott and Cody are the last two in our alliance, and Ezekiel. I think the winner of the challenge would be Scott. No, Ezekiel. So Duncan and Zeke are talking, and they realise that Eva's too much of a threat to take this to the finale. They have to get rid of her, so I think everyone just votes off Eva. Step 21 is Duncan and Scott and Ezekiel. Duncan, Jeff, Cody, Tyler. The eating challenge, Ezekiel, Scott. Throat Spoon Allen, Jeff and Tyler. Remembering the elimination order, Duncan, Jeff. So Duncan and Jeff both win immunity. Now they think it's a popularity contest, but Jeff has immunity. And the 3 boys know they would have to face a tiebreaker. And so they would pick Cody, as he's the least connected to the team. And Scott would ask Cody who would you want to face in a tiebreaker. So he has no choice but to choose Tyler. And I don't know what this tiebreaker would be because in this episode it wasn't a tiebreaker. Jeff would have gotten eliminated. So in a tiebreaker in the canon of Total Drama, Cody has defeated Tyler 1-on-1 before. I'm going to say Cody can pull it off again using that logic, and that logic alone, I'm going to assume he can beat Tyler. And Tyler's never defeated Cody. So unless it's part maybe capturing an animal, and Tyler's out. Episode 22 is really difficult because it's going to now be Jeff because he's really popular. Kenny said he would keep saying his name. Ezekiel isn't liked by a lot of people, but I don't think people would say his name. Duncan's not as popular now as Cody, and he's Scott, so I think Scott. Episode 23, Ezekiel and Scott are pretty close, but it's not on the legend round. Episode 24 would now be heroes versus villains. So Scott versus Duncan against Ezekiel versus Cody. And because Scott and Duncan are very good at sabotage and tricking Duncan, Ezekiel and Cody, and Zeke not understanding, about bad people around the world, I think Duncan and Scott would have better navigation skills on top of the fact they're more schemish, would be better at getting to the finale than Cody and Ezekiel. So Chef would choose to get rid of Ezekiel because he prefers Cody, so I think full face is Ezekiel. Episode 25, Triple Dog Dare You. Scott would be annoyed that Ezekiel isn't in the final 3 because he would have been so easy to beat. And considers him a genuine friend at this point, I think. And I think the Desert and the Zonomates would have gotten, right? But they're not around Owen this time, so that's important to note. And I think Duncan could definitely make it to the end. So between Cody and Scott, I do think Cody gets eliminated. For the simple fact, Duncan, Cody, and Scott, it's really difficult to say. But I do say Cody because Scott goes into it and is like with his farm animals, so I could see Scott being pretty resilient here. And while Cody was resilient in World Tour when he hit Duncan, that was a very exceptional scene. Outside of that, Cody's not really that resilient, so I do think he gets eliminated here. So Duncan and Scott are both in the finale. They wouldn't be nearly as popular. I imagine most people would side with Duncan, with the only people on Scott's side is Ezekiel and maybe Owen. But I don't think Lindsay would be with him, and neither would Beth. So, and I do think that Trent would probably be with Scott as well, but that's really kind of it. So this is a make sure everything's going to go on. And now let's leave him on of Todrama Island, and now we go straight into Revenge. So Heather gets put into the toxic rat steam, and basically her introduction is the same. And the only difference is Scott wouldn't really do anything, but Heather would probably cross maybe Brick instead of maybe Scott or Heather, but it doesn't really change anything because Heather's going to come on the rats. So episode 1, the rats lose to bad luck, and I think Heather would see Lightning as a very easy target for an alliance. So I think she does ask Lightning to join in her alliance. I also think she would try to get Sam as well, as she would be threatened by characters like Bee and Dawn. And I think she would see Stacy as a viable option, but I think because she knows the rest of her team, I think Stacy still goes. So episode 2 is the opposite, of course, and again, nothing really changes here. Dakota still gets voted off. Episode 3, now we get some actual changes in the timeline. First of all, because Scott isn't here, B would actually be successful in his mirror strategy this time in winning for the rats. So, I think with Heather on the team, she's now throwing, the rats win the challenge. On the mutant maggots, Joe worked in Maria, but then stopped halfway through this episode. So Cameron, Mike, and Zoe would vote for Anne Maria. Joe and Brick vote Cameron, and Joe and Maria. These three vote Anne Maria. These because Cameron would realize that Joe is a bit too useful to dump. And Joe asks Anne Maria that her and Brick need her in an actual vote. And Anne Maria asks why. And as much as they don't like each other, I think they would agree that as much as Joe and Anne Maria don't like each other, the Golden Trio are too much of a threat to keep around, and it might concern Joe and Brick a bit if they just vote for Anne Maria. So they ask Anne Maria who she wants to face in the tiebreaker, and they choose Cameron. And in Anne Maria Cameron tiebreaker, I think they just vote for Anne Maria. She's the weakest link. And I think Anne Maria wouldn't work with Joe, so I think Anne Maria's out. Episode 4 is Backstabbers Ahoy. I think Joe is still bossy to Brick. I think in this episode, Dawn gets captured, Zoe gets caught, Brick turns around to save her. Mike's not making out with Anne Maria in the entire episodes, there's also that worth knowing as well. Lightning Bees tying her up on everyone. And Brick still runs around with the challenge. And these four get out because it's very hard to capture all these four together. And Lightning gets stuck in the tree, so these three would be together the entire challenge. And Brick still sacrifices, so he gets swapped to the rats. Episode 5, Backstabbers Ahoy. So I think it's the shooters, Joe, Mike drive Mike pumps, Brick pumps, lightning pumps. So they were part of the challenge, the maggots, and then Brick drives. Lightning drives, I think Brick would shoot. Drones drives, Zoe shoots. Now Scott would say his shot was way off in the original, so now that Brick would be trying, his shot would actually be way off. So I think Brick would end up being way off in this challenge. And Heather would see that Brick is going to be an easy vote to have. As even though he's got 2 shoes, she would see his honor code could be something easy to manipulate and use to her advantage. However, because this gun is still exploded and it's still impacted by the rats, I think the rats would lose the challenge because Mike is here to still get this points. And I think they lose. So it's funny about the rats not throwing the challenge, they actually lose the challenge here. So Dawn is suspicious, isn't as suspicious of Heather, even though she doesn't like her. Heather convinces Sam and Lightning to vote for B. And she also is able to convince, but is unable to convince Dawn and Brick and B. Heather is still planning to sabotage Dawn, B, or Brick, but she doesn't do it yet as Sam's brain's kind of mush. But the other 3 voting for Sam because he's going to be easiest to beat in a tiebreaker. And I'm pretty sure B could beat Sam just by a tiebreaker, so Sam is eliminated. Episode 6 is Runway Model, and I think Dawn's able to win the challenge. Heather will try to break up B, and her and Lightning would have to try and convince Brick. And I think in the end, they vote for Joe. Lightning, Heather, and Zoe swap teams. Heather and Zoe swap teams, and I think the nomination. So episode 7. Mine is a terrible thing. So Lightning is causing Kamion's team. Dawn will try to add Zoe with Zoe and B now, so that she's in that 3-person alliance. Brick will try to work with Lightning now that Heather's not here. Heather tries to play nice with Mike and Cameron, and Anne-Marie's not here. Ezekiel's not here to capture anyone. So Brick would still turn around to save Heather, Mike, and Cameron when they're attacked by the Gopher, sending the rats to elimination. So Lightning, this is tough for Lightning because Lightning would vote for Brick, but the other 3 vote for Lightning as, in their eyes, Brick is a more worthier opponent than Lightning, so they would vote Lightning off as Brick at least try to help someone. Episode 8. Because nobody quits here, Dakota Zoe wouldn't come back as a player. Heather is annoyed that Lightning, her only ally, is eliminated, but she was going to get rid of him anyways eventually. And Chris says someone found the idol. And I think the rats would win because Mags have to actually go around the bush, and because it's not good Zoe, they should around the bush take it longer. Sending the maggots to elimination. So it seems like that Mike and Cameron are going for Heather, but Heather has the immediate idol at this point, so it's Eva who Heather decides to eliminate. So that is a group of people. I think the person she chooses to eliminate would more than likely be Mike, would be Cameron. Because Cameron's really smart and he's the biggest threat. B's going to make it to the merge and Heather's going to realise it's going to be really threatening. Cameron has told Heather that Mike has multiple personalities, so she's going to use that to blackmail him in the next episode. Now with the merge. The rats and the maggots. So the only difference here is Brick, Dawn, and B are here instead of Lightning, Joe, and not Anne-Marie, and Scott. It's episode 9. Heather blackmails Mike for the entire episode as he really wants to tell Zoe. Dawn and Bea are kidnapped by themselves, but they don't betray each other, so they just try to get out. Brick also tries to do really well here, but I think Heather wins immunity. And Mike wants to tell Zoe about Swamp's personalities, and because he can't blackmail him for something he's not keeping a secret, Heather is voting for him here. Episode 10, Zoe would be annoyed at Heather for getting rid of Mike. Dawn and Bea are against Heather. Brick would also be against Heather, but I think the challenge would be the same. It wouldn't be stopping Heather now because she's in the challenge. So I don't know what the challenge would be because Heather isn't here. So the challenge would actually now be going through an obstacle course. And I think the winner of the challenge would be Beverly. Because he's really smart and he's been very crafty in previous challenges, Brooke would be really good in this, Dawn would be okay, and Zoe would do alright, so I think Bea wins immunity. So it seems like these four are going to vote for Heather. But Heather has the immunity idol. So as ever now, if Heather decides to make an group of people, I think the person Heather would choose to summon more than likely be Dawn. Because Dawn's the biggest threat. And in this timeline, she has a 3-person alliance. She's the biggest threat in her alliance. She uses his idol and gets rid of Brick, as he's the biggest threat that's not immune. So everyone votes for Heather, but Heather uses his idol and get rid of Brick. Episode 11 is Eat You Can Be Wary. I think Heather would win the challenge because she's really good at eating challenges. Zoe still goes commando, and I think Zoe wins immunity. And a bit of a spoiler warning here, I think everyone's just funning off Heather, so I think Heather can't save herself here. Episode 12 is the fire plant, so Dawn being Zoe, I think they would... It's not like a rivalry, but they're just friends. And I think Dawn would win the challenge. And I think she would choose to take Bea to the end because Zoe has gone commando and Bea's a much lesser threat going around. They've been pretty close all season, so I think Dawn and Bea are in the finale. They got to pin each other for 3 seconds, but I think the winner would be Dawn. So that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. This Team Ocean Racing season will go on if Heather and Scott swap seasons. And yeah, peace farewell.